Let's move on to chapter 5, in which Rachel gets mad about women having the right to vote. She writes that most people are at least somewhat familiar with a few of the more famous suffragettes and their various actions in securing the vote for women. Susan B. Anthony, for instance, was famously arrested and fined for illegally voting in 1872. She helped found the National American Women's Suffrage Association in the US. Many people do not know that not only were the pro-suffrage activist groups in the minority, but that there were also prominent anti-suffragist women who formed activist groups in response to the suffragettes. Fewer people are aware of this fact because this is another part of the history of women's liberation that is intentionally hidden. In fact, some of the most vehement opposition to women voting came from women themselves. I find their reasoning to be prescient and compelling, which is why I believe it's intentionally obscured from history. No, I think it's always been common knowledge that some women oppose the right to vote, but most people don't want to give credit to the people actively arguing for oppression, you know? I've never understood being opposed to a group having a right to do something. If you don't personally want to vote, you don't have to do it. Just because you might not want to, that doesn't give you a right to try and take away that right from other people who do want their voices heard. But for these anti-suffragist women or anti-suffrage women, it was never about allowing women to choose not to vote, was it? It was all about keeping women as a whole silent and oppressed. And if anything, I find it really sad that some women are so brainwashed that they actively believe their own oppression and the oppression of other women is a good thing. This goes for people who were anti-suffrage back in the day and people like Rachel Wilson today. Also, I'm not sure where she gets this idea that we're intentionally hiding that there were people against it. We know there were people against it, but they're not worth celebrating. It's like the people who were vocal about being pro-slavery. We don't sit there and be like, oh, well, you know what, they had some good points, because they didn't. She writes that they quite accurately predicted that pushing women to enter the political sphere and the women's liberation movement in general would cause the breakdown of the family, division in marriages, and a lack of effort and focus on children and community, which had always been the main work of women until that point. They also correctly pointed out that women enjoyed greater protection and privilege under patriarchy than is afforded to liberated women. I disagree with all of this. This is absolutely insane. That said, if you really believe that women having choices leads to breakdown of the family, then maybe that family structure that you're so in support of wasn't actually that strong in the first place, was it? If it's so good for everyone, then you shouldn't have to force women to be involved in it only because they have no other choice, should you? Funnily enough, I had one of you brilliant lot leave a comment on this exact thing as I was writing the script for this part of the video. So shout out to Heather De Silva, who said, "It's heartbreaking to see how many women don't understand what feminism is and buy into a limited history. Yes, during the suffrage movement, some women did stand up against it because they didn't want to vote, not realising it was not about forcing women to vote, and instead it was about having the right to vote if you want to. So don't want to vote? Then don't. Simple." And like I mentioned before, let's not forget there were also people who were against everything from black people and people of colour getting the right to vote, people who were against the abolition of slavery, people who were pro-segregation, and so on. There have always been people on the wrong side of history. And I'm sorry, but any person who says women have protection and privilege under patriarchy is so laughably wrong, I'm not sure I can trust anything they say on any matter. Rachel goes on to write that they believed, as I do, that women are much more influential and effective outside direct involvement in governing. They also wisely asserted that the primary role of government is to protect people and property, and that men are the only ones capable of that task. Again, I cannot disagree more. I'm pretty sure I've used this example before, but if you want evidence of how good women can be in government compared to men, you just need to look at the COVID pandemic. Marianne Seichard writes about this in her book The Authority Gap, where she says, "We all saw during the COVID-19 pandemic how much more successful on average female leaders were than male ones. Globally, women only held 7% of government leadership positions, yet four of the top 10 countries which dealt best with COVID-19 were led by women." Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times looked at the death rates in 13 countries led by men and 8 led by women after the first few months of the pandemic. The male-led ones had an average of 214 corona deaths per million. The female-led ones only had 36 per million. He writes, "It's not that the leaders who best managed the virus were all women, but that those who bungled the response were all men, and mostly a particular type: authoritarian, vainglorious, and blustering. virtually every country that has experienced coronavirus mortality at a rate of more than 150 per million inhabitants is male-led. He believed that it was a question of ego. Female leaders were happy to put public health first and defer to science experts to act quickly. Most of all, they were humble. They didn't assume that their country would be fine because either they or their nation was somehow exceptional. There was no bluster or strutting, they just got down to the job, she writes. So yeah, clearly when we look at the evidence, women are just incapable of the job when they're the ones saving millions of people's lives. I'm not sure if Rachel is just talking nonsense because she hates women or if she's projecting her own incompetence onto her entire gender, but either way, it is very harmful and completely incorrect. She actually writes, if you can believe this, burdening women with a task of which they are incapable is inappropriate and detrimental to women themselves. Like, as a well-educated woman who cares about myself, my community, and wider society, I am more than capable of simply voting in an election. That is neither inappropriate nor detrimental to women. Voting isn't that hard. You read the manifestos of the candidates, you weigh up which ones you like best and which policies you like best and which ones you want to support or don't want to support, you decide who you think will do the best job, and then you put a little cross on a piece of paper. That is, as I said, neither inappropriate nor detrimental to me or other women. A woman wanting a say over what happens to her, her family, her friends, and her community is completely normal. Then goes on to show us a list of 10 reasons why women in Nebraska at the time were opposed to women being able to vote. She writes, try to read through these points with an open mind and put aside the feminist propaganda you've been swimming in your entire life as you read them and imagine a world where these women won out. And then ask yourself, it might not be better. Poorly written, but anyway. So this list includes, number 1, because they have not lost faith in their fathers, husbands, sons, and brothers who afford full protection to the community, there being no call for women to relieve them of the task. Okay, but I have lost faith in men to protect my community and other communities, usually because they're the ones hurting my community and other communities. I understand that my experiences as an individual will differ from the experiences of others as an individual, but that's why I want to have my own say in what happens to me and my community and not allow someone else to make those decisions for me, especially if those decisions will only end up being made by men who can never understand what it's actually like to be a woman. You need everyone to be able to speak up for themselves and their own needs. You know, this actually reminds me of, I got a comment the other day, this is off script, sorry, but I got a comment the other day from this guy, it was on my, what video? It was about the Whatever podcast, and it was the bit where I was talking about, like, high rates of sexual assault and violence against women from men and that sort of thing, and this guy goes in the comments, it's like, ugh, such a feminist, blah, 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 who hurt you? And, like, clearly he was trying to be like, oh, you're just, like, hurt and damaged and lashing out, and I'm like, have you not been listening to me? You want to know who hurt me? It was men. Men who catcall me every time I leave the house. Men who followed me home from nights out and literally, like, in the dark and terrified me and tried to enter my building. Men who've tried to get in Ubers and taxis with me without my consent. Men who have literally groped me and sexually assaulted me in public. Men who have committed domestic violence against me. Men who have physically assaulted me for my entire life. Men who have hurt me and my friends and my family. Like that's who's hurt me, and that's exactly what I'm trying to say. You're trying to use who hurt you as like a derogatory thing, but it's a genuine question. Men hurt me. And he replied to this comment being like, ugh, you're just using buzzwords to try and get your audience emotional. And I'm like, no, I'm not. You're not listening. These are real experiences that women have and have had and will continue to have, including myself. I'm not just making them up because they're buzzwords. I'm saying them because they're things that have actually happened to me. There's a reason why I don't trust men to protect me, because historically they haven't, and I don't believe they will. You know? The list goes on, and number 2 is because women realise that when they become voters, they will, in consequence, have to serve as jurors and be compelled to hear all the repugnant details incident to murder trials and trials for other crimes disclosing unspeakable wickedness. Jury service is abhorrent to every normal woman. This is crazy, right? I'm absolutely fine with that. I don't suppose jury duty is fun for many people, but it's a necessary part of supporting our communities, and I'm personally happy to accept that responsibility. It's fine. Also, I find it interesting that they were saying this back in the day, and yet these days, women are the largest consumers of true crime content. Interesting, isn't it? Number 3 is because in political activities there is constant strife, turmoil, contention and bitterness, producing conditions from which every normal woman naturally shrinks. Who is this normal woman you keep mentioning? Again, I see no turmoil or constant strife in being afforded a say over my own government. Wild. It's so hyperbolic. Skipping to number 5, and it's because when women noisily contest and scramble for public office, woman pitted against woman, they write an indictment of womankind against which all right-minded women strenuously protest. The only women against other women here are you. Seriously. Number 6 is because women can accomplish more through counselling than they can ever attain through commanding. Again, I disagree. Different women have different skills. Let the good leaders lead. 7 is because woman suffrage will not enhance peace and harmony in the home, but on the contrary, in the heat of a campaign, it is sure to bring about dissension and discord. Now, why do you think that is? Do you think it's because they understand that some women may vote differently to their husbands? Isn't that more of a reason why they deserve a say of their own and can't just put all their faith in letting men make decisions for them? And finally, number 10 on the list was because every reason supporting the claim of women to vote supports also the right of women to be consulted as to whether they shall or shall not be given the ballot. But this makes no sense, because if you allow women the right to vote, you can still choose not to. You're not having that taken away from you. But if you deny women the right to vote, you can't choose to do it. So you are having something taken away from you. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. You know, after reading all this nonsense, I sure hope that Rachel Wilson herself does not vote. You know, I've actually heard that people in America can look up whether people have voted in previous elections or not. So if anyone wants to do that and look up Rachel Wilson and let me know, I think that'd be pretty funny, because I reckon she's not leaving it up to Andrew and the men in her life. I reckon she's probably voting herself whilst being against the vote. That said, I have heard the argument from these conservative women that they totally don't want to vote, but they have to cancel out the votes of other women like me. Even though I'm not American, but you know what I mean, women like me. Guys, like, they're so damn close to getting it, but just missing the point entirely. It's frustrating, isn't it? Girls on the right, anti-suffragists were right to ask who will take care of the children. The overall number of US children under 5 with working mothers outside the home in 1900 was less than 6%. By 2012, that number had jumped to 58%. You know, if they're really that concerned about this, the men could just step up and look after the kids themselves, you know? Just saying. Also, have you noticed, she uses suffragettes and suffragists almost interchangeably. I don't think she quite knows the difference between them. But anyway, no. She goes on to write, the anti-suffragists were also right about what the future of marriage and family would look like if we instituted such sweeping societal change. By 1900, the rate of births outside marriage was 4%. By 2010, not quite a century after the passage of the 19th Amendment, the rate of out-of-wedlock births had reached 41%. There are numerous other statistics I could cite here, but I don't want to repeat too much material that is already covered in the book. And yet she still does. And most of you can look around you at the society you live in and see the results of the work of women suffragists. Yeah, I look around and I'm personally pretty damn grateful for what they've done. I like having the right to vote. I personally love not having to get married and have kids. I personally love having bodily autonomy. I personally love seeing women in positions of power and leadership and government. But that's just me. Well, with the exception of Margaret Thatcher. That was her politics and her anti-working class stance, not her gender. Rachel says suffrage was so unpopular with women in 1895 that the state of Massachusetts asked women of voting age whether they wanted suffrage. Of the 575,000 eligible women voters, only 22,204 voted yes. That's only 3.8%. Also, guys, can we take a moment to appreciate the irony of Rachel trying to argue that women shouldn't have a right to vote by quoting a study in which women voted for what they wanted or didn't want. It makes no sense. This is true. However, an article that I found written in The Atlantic in 1903 actually pointed out that it was a much higher percentage than this in western states and lower in the southern states. It also points out that the other 96% of people weren't necessarily against the vote, but many were merely indifferent. And why? Well, I'd argue it's as simple as the fact that A, they've never really considered it before because women not having power was so common. It had never previously crossed their minds and they didn't really know what they were missing. And or B, they thought it was such an impossibility that they didn't even bother to get their hopes up or want it. And or C, many of them were not in a position to speak out about wanting the vote because they were reliant on men who didn't want them to have it in the first place, and they didn't want to risk their safety. We also have to remember that it was 1895, 20 odd years before women actually got the vote in the UK and the US, and so a lot can and did change in that time. By the time women did get the vote, a lot more than this 4% were in support of it. Isn't it crazy to think that over time, with education and strong outspoken leaders, the public opinions and wants and needs change? Who'd have thunk it, eh? She then goes on a rant about how women only got the vote in America because of a particular family of rich Jewish people who were apparently pushing an agenda. So again, it's a conspiracy and nothing to do with the fact that this is what real women wanted. She thinks it's big, bad, evil Jews who are forcing women to speak up for themselves. Oh God, she's a little bit terrifying, isn't she? She writes, suffrage was not exactly a grassroots movement whose inevitability couldn't be denied. Like most social justice movements and political revolutions, the women's suffrage movement was forced upon the populace by the wealthiest, most powerful transnational elites in the world and has occult beliefs underpinning its ideology. It's weird that she genuinely believes this stuff, isn't it? I mean, we can't deny that without proper funding and popular influential figureheads, the suffrage movement wouldn't have been as influential as quickly as it was, but implying that it's an occult conspiracy by a Jewish family with money is just ridiculous. It's also worth pointing out that a lot of these occult influences that Rachel points out were, like I say, A, Jewish, which I'll be honest hints at more than a hint of anti-Semitism on her part, and B, American with no British or European or any other counterparts. So I don't understand how she accounts for the suffrage movements in the UK and other countries around the world. The story of women's suffrage in the UK is very different to that in America. Remember the Reform Act of 1832 that I mentioned in the beginning of this video? Well, according to the excellent book Rise Up Women by Diane Atkinson, she writes that the Reform Act of 1832 extended the franchise to give the vote to male persons over the age of 21 who lived in the counties and for the first time included small landowners, tenant farmers and shopkeepers and householders living in the boroughs who paid a yearly rent of £10 or more. It enlarged the existing electorate by half a million men by 300,000 new voters. The insertion of the word male was the first statutory bar to women having the vote and was a catalyst for the founding of the women's suffrage movement. One of the first people to push back against only men being allowed to vote was a Yorkshire lady of rank called Mary Smith, who Diane says, and again I quote, was dismayed by the terms of the Act which enfranchised many men and no women. She asked Henry Orator Hunt, the radical MP for Preston, to present a petition to Parliament, the first from a woman asking for the vote. Henry Hunt had opposed the Great Reform Bill on behalf of working men who were disenfranchised by its property qualifications. In the House of Commons on the 3rd of August 1832, so that early, Hunt cited several excellent reasons why every unmarried female possessing the necessary pecuniary qualification should be entitled to elect a member of Parliament. The argument put forth by Mary Smith stated that she paid taxes and therefore did not see why she should not have a share in the election of a representative. She also stated that women were liable to all punishments of law, not accepting death, and ought to have a voice in the making of them. So sure, she was also a rich woman with connections and influence, but no occult links here. No big conspiracy. She was just a regular, well, not even a regular woman, she's a rich woman, but she was essentially a regular woman who just wanted a say over her life, and she made a damn good point. And this was happening way earlier on than Rachel understands or realizes or talks about, you know? Women continued to fight and actively influence politics, especially in the UK, throughout the 1800s and into the early 1900s. And this was, with the exception of like Mary Smith here, primarily led by a lot of working class men and women. This ultimately led to 1918, where all women over the age of 30 who met a property qualification were allowed to vote, and all women over the age of 21 were allowed to vote in 1928. it was 1928 when they finally got the same voting rights as men. This has since been lowered to the age of 18, but all that happened over time. I think Rachel really forgets that there are different countries that exist outside of America, and we have a different history, and different people have been influential in different countries.